Welcome to Unfuck Your Brain. I'm your host, Cara Loewentheil, Master Certified Coach and founder of the School of New Feminist Thought. I'm here to help you turn down your anxiety, turn up your confidence, and create a life on your own terms, one that you're truly excited to live. Let's go. All right, my friends, welcome. This is a different kind of guest than I usually have, I would say, because this is someone who I actually knew before I ever became a coach. Possibly the only coach, quote unquote, that my father knew at the time that I decided to quit law and become a life coach. So it's probably only thanks to Jerry, who's here with us today, that my father didn't have a total heart attack when I told him what I was going to do. So I'm very excited to have Jerry Colonna. And I also just realized that I didn't ask you how to pronounce your name before we did this. Is that right?
Well, you pronounced it incredibly well.
Perfect.
So thank you for that.
Then we're just going to keep rolling with that. And so before we even get into your new book and leadership, all the juicy stuff we're going to talk about today, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do and how you got to where you are?
Sure. Well, first thing I will say is I did perform CPR on your father. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, when he heard. Okay, I was like, I missed the story. My God.
No, we had a pre-existing relationship, if you will, a pre-existing condition. And it's been a delight to have you join what I often refer to as the Avengers, the group of people who are sort of out there to really, to borrow your phrase, to unfuck the world in many ways, because what we're trying to do is really meaningful. So yeah, I'm an executive coach. I have been doing this work now for 27 years. Prior to that, I was a venture capitalist. So I was on the dark side. I was part of the Sith Lord.
It's okay. My brothers joined the dark side now too. You know, we all have the dark side in our families.
That's right. Actually, relevant to this, what happened was that in my late 30s, the experience of being an investor was so contrary to my internal sense of values that the more success I had, the worse I felt. And I got to this point where I literally couldn't live with myself. And a lifelong relationship with depression had caught up to me. And rather than take my life, which is what I was considering at 38, I actually stopped everything. As I often say, sat on my ass until I could figure shit out. And what I emerged as from that time period was this odd combination of Buddhist, whatever I am, business expert in whatever way that I am, and coach. And really focused on a very simple way of understanding this, which is that better humans make better leaders. And as simplistic as that is fucking hard. Because as you well know, unfucking yourself and growing the heck up and becoming a fully grown adult is a really hard process. Because it requires one to actually confront oneself. And as you've done so well in your book, the world at large and the way the world kind of doesn't want us to do the thing that we need to do, which is to grow into ourselves.
Before we get into leadership, I'd love to hear more about that sort of experience of, I think what in medicine at least they call like moral injury, right? Which is like having to do your job in a context in which you feel like you're betraying your values by performing your job well or vice versa.
Yeah.
I think a lot of women, because women are so socialized to just like do what they're told and follow the path, they're not even sure what their own values or purpose are, and then sort of get to their 30s and 40s, go through this kind of similar reckoning often. I'd love to hear, like, when you reach that crisis moment, you're like, okay, something has to be different. I have to stop what I'm doing. What was that like journey or that like liminal period like for you of trying to figure out what came next, or not trying to figure out and just letting it arise?
It was more the latter than the former. I mean, the hallmark, and this is, for those of us, and I will acknowledge that I identify as male, I identify as cisgender, white, and from Brooklyn. That's all one big thing. For those of us who are socialized as I was in a male patriarchal system, a lot of our identity comes from the thing that we do, from the output, right? And that itself creates its own moral injury in the world at large. For me, what was happening was I was very good at the job that I was doing. So ding, 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 ring the bell, you get a prize. And it wasn't that the work that I was doing was necessarily evil or hurtful to the world, although you could make the argument in that way. There are plenty of people that I think do good work in the world because they bring their humanity and their values into that experience. The problem was that it was crosswise with my own sense of self. And crosswise is the term that my teacher and friend Parker Palmer uses, which is when the external parts of ourselves are in such conflict with the internal parts of ourselves that we're in this double bind. And let's acknowledge a certain amount of privilege here to go out into the world and say, oh, I'm successful and that hurts is a complex stance to take. Okay, I recognize that. But it would also be dishonest if I didn't say that that was in fact what was happening, and that the more outward approbation I was getting for being this shell of a person, the worse I felt. And so what was it like? It was awful. I mean, I was literally, the pivot point was February 2nd, 2002, after the 9/11 attacks. I was at the Wall Street subway station considering leaping, and it was only by the grace of God and a phone call to my therapist, Dr. Sayers, that stopped me from doing it. And I think in the years since, 23 years, whatever it is, I have settled into being a better human. And the good that I do today stems solely from making that choice at that moment in time.
So one of the things you talk about in your book, Reboot, is a concept that listeners of this podcast have heard about a lot called radical self-inquiry, right? Which we might define in different ways, but I'd love to hear how you define it. And then you talk about how it's critical to professional success, to healthy relationships. So can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that term and why it's so crucial?
Sure. I first started using that term maybe 15, 18 years ago because I was, honestly, Kara, I was trying to describe something that I was doing, but none of the language made sense for me. And I actually paraphrased something that the Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron uses. And the way I describe it is it's the process by which our self-deception and the masks that we wear are slowly and compassionately, and that last word is really fucking important, compassionately stripped away so that we have no place left to hide. And what do I mean by that? It's kind of a mashup between traditional psychoanalytic psychology and what I was trained as a Buddhist in doing, which is a kind of sharp pointing out instructions, like kind of goes like this. And if I sound like I'm from Brooklyn, it's because I am. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Right? My famous question that sort of bounces around the internet all over the place is, how have you been complicit in creating the conditions you say you don't want? And this is a really importantly organized question, because what I don't want to trigger is, how have you been responsible for the conditions in your life? Many people are socialized to be guilt sponges and soak up all responsibility for all conditions in their life. That's not good. But sometimes we help the process along, the way the getaway driver helps the bank robbery. Don't be an accomplice to making your life miserable. And equally important, how does it serve you? Because some part of us gets served by even our worst behavior. How does it serve us? So that we reveal those things so that we can then make conscious choices, as you well know. Conscious choices about, how would I like to live? How would I like to feel about myself? How would I like to engage with another person or relate to money or to the world? And lastly, I would say it's radical because most of us are socialized to not ask those questions. Most of us are socialized to just live with the consequences of those decisions.
Yeah, I think listeners of this podcast will have heard a version of this that is, how is what you're thinking helping to create the returns you're getting, right? You or put your thinking in a certain way, and then it's creating, again, you are not totally responsible for everything that happens to you, but the way that you're thinking is unfortunately sort of boomeranging to produce like more of this outcome that you don't want, right? And that emphasis on self-compassion is so important to, I mean, I think for one thing, just to being self-compassionate is kind of radical. A lot of people have
Yes.
a lot of self-pity or a lot of self-loathing or a lot of self
Right.
other things,
Right.
but self-compassion is like neither of those things. It's neither,
Right.
oh, you poor baby, everything's against you, like,
Right.
you know, which is what people think it is kind of, nor is it, you know, sometimes I'll have women tell me they're being self-compassionate when they're like actively criticizing themselves, right? It's like
Right.
the radical neutrality of like, I have compassion for myself as a suffering being, and I'm being honest with myself about what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what I'm doing, and how is that impacting my life.
I love that term you just used, radical neutrality, because James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be transformed, but nothing can be transformed until it's faced. And I love this notion of radical neutrality that you just used, which is to sort of approach the questions and the struggles from a place of not seeking blame, from a place of seeking agency. And it's like, oh, wait, I may not have been responsible for the way I was raised as a munchkin, but I can do something about it. And even the belief system that I might not be able to do something about it, more often than not, and you do this, you talk about this well, may in fact be service to a system that undermines my own, not only self-compassion, but self-healing and self-growth.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you can't be fully honest with yourself if you're not compassionate with yourself, right? Because you won't tell yourself the truth. When you have an agenda and you think only certain thoughts or feelings or actions are like okay or acceptable, then you don't get the truth. Just like, you know, a kid won't tell you the truth if you scream at them when they give the wrong answer. Like, you're not going to get the truth.
Right.
So I'd love to, this is sort of, I think the segue here that I'll explicitly say is a segue, is that I think part of what we're talking about is like self-leadership and how you lead yourself. And something that you write a lot about is leadership, not just for yourself, but for people around you. And I really wanted to talk to you about this topic because women have, I think we were just chatting before this started, like the socialization is sort of like, for women is like, you're not inherently a leader. Men are inherently leaders. Women are inherently followers. And if you were going to be a leader, you'll know you're ready to be a leader if you always know the right answer and are always going to get it right and not fail, which is an impossible standard, right? So I'd love to hear, like, what do you think leadership is? How does it relate to radical self-inquiry? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think that it's a powerful question, you know, an animating notion. And I wrote about this in my first book, Reboot. An animating notion that I have is that better humans make better leaders. And that's a kind of obvious statement. And yet, when you juxtapose the obvious statement against the reality, which is that we have a massive epidemic of toxic leadership and really, really harmful abuses of power, what you start to see is that this process of becoming a better human is essential if we are going to create a world in which human beings, however they manifest, however they identify, are able to step into a fullness of their own being. That requires human beings, people who hold power, to do their work. My teacher and friend Parker Palmer has a funny saying. He likes to say, the unexamined life may not be worth living, but if you choose to live an unexamined life, please don't take a job that involves other people. And, you know, he's on to something, because what happens is when you give power to anyone who is socialized to not look under the hood, they spread toxicity around. And speaking as someone who has been socialized as male, I will tell you that there are all sorts of messages of danger that boys receive from a very early age about the danger of looking under the hood. Do not go there, because if you go there, laundry list of all the bad things that will happen. And then we give those kids power and chaos ensues. So from where I sit, the only way we can redeem those who have power is through this notion of radical self-inquiry. Not just for their own sake. Hey, let's cut your propensity for depression. But most importantly, for those around them who have to work with them.
If you are a therapist, if you have a therapist, if you know a therapist, if you love a therapist, I have 2 pieces of incredible news for you. The first is that we have created a free guide called Closing the Brain Gap in Women's Therapy, 3 ways to deepen rapport, get better results, and blow your clients' minds. And I know that's not exactly therapy language, but you get the point. This is a totally free guide that you can grab at feministtherapy.com. That's feministtherapy.com, and you can grab the guide there. And it's really designed to help you take the kind of framework that I teach on this podcast and start to integrate it into your sessions in a way that doesn't have anything to do with like your political positions or your client's political positions necessarily. And when you get that guide and you sign up for that guide, you're going to get added to our list to be on the early announcement for something I'm super excited about, a brand new program that I'm offering just for therapists who want to integrate feminist coaching perspectives, the feminist socialization lens into their practice. It's not specifically coaching tools. As a therapist, you have your own tools, you have your own methodology and modality. This program will give you access to my tools in case you want to use them, but it's really about integrating a feminist lens into your practice. So that's all I can say about the program right now. It is still top secret. It's not released to the public yet. But when you come and download this free guide that I created, Closing the Brain Gap in Women's Therapy, you will automatically get put on that early bird list to hear about that program as soon as it's announced. All you need to do right now is go to feministtherapy.com or text your email to +1 347 997 1784, and the code word is therapy. +1 347 997 1784. Text us your email. You're going to get a text back asking for the code, and the code word is therapy, and we will send it straight to you. I would love to talk a little bit about what you mean. You've said a few times, better people make better leaders. And I can see like my listeners, especially people socialized as women, being like, oh my God, I knew it. I'm not a good enough person. I need to become a better person in order to be a good leader. So let's talk about like what you mean when you say sort of better people. I think one of the threads we've been talking about is people who are more honest with themselves, right? People who are more self-compassionate.
Yeah.
I'm curious if there's other like adjectives you would add, but I don't think that you mean sort of like more morally virtuous in an objective way, which is like what we've been socialized to think that word means.
Yeah. Well, first of all, if I contribute to that negative self-talk, I apologize. That's not.
Oh, no, I just think, I just know how my people's brains will hear something like that.
And by the way, it's also not necessarily better humans, better people are not necessarily quote unquote more skillful in a task. The subtitle of my first book is Leadership in the Art of Growing Up. That's a tongue-in-cheek way of talking about what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being fully grown adults. Fully grown adults take responsibility. You know, my friend Michael Carroll, who's a coach, a mindfulness leadership coach, likes to say, you know, a good leader cleans up the milk, even if they didn't spill it.
Something I'm trying to teach my stepchildren all the time.
I mean, it's like
we're in a
you
family,
walk into,
so we're all going to contribute to this, even if you didn't do it.
It's like look at the mess here. Clean up this. You know, take care of one another. Be kind. Have self-compassion, so that when you get triggered, because guess what, we're all human. We get triggered. You take responsibility. You acknowledge that you may have hurt somebody. You apologize. And you endeavor to make amends. You know, you wear clean underwear, you eat your vegetables, and you sit up straight. I mean,
this is a broad-ranging set of
I'm trying to be funny and relatively simplistic to make this less complicated than our minds can make us. Oh my God, being a better leader means what? I mean, look, we have political leadership right now. Right now, my lips to God's ears, we may have a chance at overturning the hegemony of this negative, toxic leadership that has been so dominant in this country for well over a decade.
I think for women especially, because one of the things that I'm actually about to teach a training on, the idea of like over responsibilities. I think women are socialized to take too much responsibility for everybody else, but then correspondingly, what they don't realize is they're not taking enough responsibility for themselves in some ways. Because I also think women are socialized to see taking responsibility for yourself as essentially meaning being really self-critical. Like I have a lot of women who will come to me and say like, I'm just really self-aware. Here's a list of all my flaws. I'm like, that's actually not self-awareness. That's
Right.
self-criticism, right?
Right. Well,
So it's
let's talk about the Buddhist concept of delusion, right? Delusion is not actually seeing things as they really are. And you seeing yourself as shitty is kind of delusional. It's just as delusional as what a grandiose narcissist would say is only I have the solution. A good word I like is discernment. Can you move through the world with discernment? Taking responsibility for the mess that exists in the world, but not necessarily falling into the trap of guilt, right? Or even if I have made a mistake, approaching that mistake from a place of remorse and regret, which moves us forward and helps us feel the lesson implicit in it, and not the guilt, which starts to self-lacerate. And then all of a sudden we're trapped in this negative loop. And while I recognize that a lot of folks who identify as women are socialized in that way, there are men who are also socialized that way.
Yeah, and people's family environments also are.
Exactly.
I mean, I think of it as a Venn diagram. It's like
Yes.
some men get it from their family, some don't. Some women get it from their family and some don't, but then women get it like all women get it from society. So they've got like a baseline of it, no matter even if their family was totally different. But I think that point that like when you are super self-critical, you are delusional in that sense of like you're flattening yourself the same way as if you see anybody outside of you as being completely good or completely bad. It's all of that flattening. And I think like when women imagine a leader, they do imagine someone who like knows the right answer and knows what to do all the time and is confident in it all the time. So I'd love to hear like, let's talk about conflict a little bit, because I think that's lots of people are conflict averse. Women are certainly socialized to be conflict averse, and especially in the workplace to sort of this is something I've worked on myself, and I'm not like in my personal relationships, I'm not conflict averse, but when I started building out more of a team and having like a leadership team, I thought sort of the norm should be that we don't have any conflict. Like that's something I've, chosen my family and personal relationships to avoid certain kinds of conflict. And it was definitely like a big growth moment for me with our, external business support to be like, oh, it's okay for the people in this team to like have some conflict, because that's what happens when you have humans with different ideas. But I'm curious kind of where do you see, like, what are common ways that you see people having difficulty as leaders with healthy conflict? Like what kind of baggage they're bringing in and how can people start to reframe that?
Well, it's a great question, because I think it is, in fact, one of the universal misunderstandings of leadership, and that leadership is supposed to result in conflict-free zones. I'm a fountain of quotes, so here's another quote. David Richo, the Buddhist psychologist, has a wonderful little book called How to Be Adult in Relationship. It's part of his How to Be an Adult series. It's a great series. And his quote from the former book is, to be adult in relationship is not to be conflict-free. It's to resolve conflicts mindfully. And if we want to talk about both adulting skills and leadership skills and where the Venn diagram there is, it's the ability to resolve conflicts mindfully. It's the ability to say, oh, wait, my bad. The thing you were saying, I wasn't really listening because it kind of triggered all this bullshit inside of me. So can we start over? And can you tell me again what your idea is? Or whatever it is that's the source of the conflict. You're right. Many people are socialized to either avoid conflict or dampen it down as quickly as possible. I remember working with a team, a senior leadership team, and we were all together in a meeting, and I was just observing at this point. One of the things I will do. And something happened once, then twice, and the third time. And what it was tension was rising in the group. They were talking about new ideas. There were cross ideas, and somebody made a joke. Mm-hmm. And I pointed this out, and the CEO slapped his forehead and said, oh my God, it's like Sunday afternoon at my family. Mm. Every time something uncomfortable would arise, somebody would make a joke. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't think of that as conflict avoidance, but it is.
Yeah.
It's like, ooh, it's getting a little hot in here.
Yeah, let me diffuse and distract.
Right. Or people please, or shrink in my own self, versus getting curious about it. is there a point of curiosity that can happen? So you asked about healthy conflict. There's a lovely phrase we use at our company when we teach these skills. And that is, when the going gets tough, turn to wonder. When the heat starts to rise, can you get curious? Now, I can say I find it easier to do in groups than I do in my romantic relationship. But that's a good adulting skill.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot on this podcast about the importance of curiosity when you're doing your own self-reflective work. We just jump to judgment, we jump to shame, right? And we do that with other people. Like we jump to judgment or we jump to assumptions instead of curiosity. One of the things that was coming up for me as you talked is that I think another problem that women sometimes have in leadership is that we've been socialized to think, that like everyone should agree and get along. And if you are really a leader, like if you are a CEO, for example, there's going to be times that like your leadership team doesn't agree, or you agree with one of them and not the others, and you're going to have to make that decision. And I've had even my own thoughts thinking that like, that means I'm like pulling rank right. And then I have to really coach myself to be like, well, yeah, like I am the CEO, so I have to make this decision. So that is a rank, but like, that's okay. But I think that because women are socialized to avoid hierarchy, it's like we're trying to like cover it up. And then we also act, when you are not willing to acknowledge something, you end up acting crazier about it than otherwise. So you end up being like more irrational or more reactive or more impulsive or whatever else because you're like uncomfortable with the whole dynamic. And so I think there's like a lot of important work to do for women CEOs or women team leaders in like uncovering like how were you socialized around hierarchy or being in charge or getting to make a decision that someone else disagrees with. Like, why is that so uncomfortable for you, right? That's often very uncomfortable for people socialized as women, not only, but especially to like not only make a decision, but make a decision that someone else is going to be upset with and like let that be a thing that's happening, that a person may leave a meeting and you didn't resolve it into consensus. They are upset about the decision you made. And like, I mean, I coach on this in personal relationships too, right? Like, what if it's true that your husband does find that annoying and he still loves you and wants to be married to you? Like,
Right.
Can you allow for him to find that annoying?
Right.
Just like
right.
you find shit about him annoying, but still
Right.
love him and want to be married to him.
Right. I think in a sense, you've worked into the spot that makes the most sense, which is the possibility of having multiple feelings, whether it's in a group or whether in a relationship or even within ourselves. I was really curious about, I have my own answer to the question, but I'm curious to hear your answer. From the way in which you were socialized, what is wrong with hierarchy?
I think with the socialization, there's like two different areas. There's like gender socialization and then there's like progressive socialization, like leftist socialization kind of. So the gender socialization is like, oh no, there's hierarchy, but women aren't at the top of it. Like, men are natural leaders and women are natural followers and men make decisions and then women follow them out. And so I think obviously this stuff is changing, but even when I was growing up, 40 years ago, like who plays the CEO in all the movies? It's like mostly a man. And if it's a woman, then it's like a big point of interest that she's the CEO and she's probably unmarried and,
Right.
has 12 dogs or whatever. It's cruel.
Or
It's Cruella
cats.
DeVille. Yeah. Like she,
Right.
there's like something weird about her. So, and that's just one example, but I think there's a general sort of like, there are authorities, but you're not the authority. And then there's this like, authorities are correct because women are socialized that like the way that you stay safe and good is you just do what you're told and like follow the path and the authorities tell you to do. And then that ends up backfiring when women decide they want to be their own authority. They associate authority with correctness. Then if they're not sure they're correct, then they can't be the authorities. They get stuck in that whirlpool. And then there's like a separate strain, I think that not all, but a lot of my listeners probably also experience, which is a kind of more of a political socialization that you maybe get when you're a little bit older around, hierarchies being inherently oppressive and a sort of structurally Marxist power differential of like the person with power is bad, power is used to oppress, decision making is power. So I think there's like multiple strands. And one of the things you just said that I kind of love as a place for us to like land is it's not just multiple conflicting feelings or thoughts in a group, in a relationship. It's like even in yourself. Sometimes you're going to have those multiple strands. And I think that like the perfectionism that I see so much in my clients of like, but I have to know the right way to think or the right way to like, I had somebody come on a coaching call the other day and be like, well, I have this problem and I've come up with these two solutions, but they both seem feminist in different ways. So I don't know which one to do. What's the right one? Right. I'm like, there's no right. I don't have like a checklist we can do where we determine which one of these is more feminist and therefore more right. Like there's no right way to do it or right way to feel. The black and whiteness of that thinking of like, there's a right thought, there's a right belief. I should have one feeling about it, should like all cohere is like so at odds with the messiness of being a human.
Yeah, so it's actually quite constraining, and it limits creativity and spontaneity, and it limits love in an organizational structure. I was fascinated by your response. I have two thoughts that come into mind. The first is I remember a client, socialized as male, hoodie wearing, tech bro, who, when I would say, well, you need to actually hold on to the vision of what this organization is supposed to be. Someone has to hold that. And he would say, but I don't want to be that guy. And I said, what guy? He goes, that guy, the asshole, the one who tells everybody what to do. Right. So there's that image. And then my wife, who's also my co-founder, Ali Schultz, uses horses in her leadership work. And one of the things she taught me was that the leader of a herd of horses, which is usually a mare, is picked based on who has the most empathetic awareness of what's actually happening in the herd, not who's the biggest and strongest stallion that's going to fight off the wolves. And I think that that's a really fascinating notion, because what we're talking about is the leader is not the one who has the right answers. The leader, Peter Drucker, who is the most revered leadership consultant of the 20th century, used to say, the leader is the one who knows how to ask the right questions. And right isn't just the performative one. It's the one that's going to elicit the best collaborative response from the group. It's actually a felt sense. So, rather than falling for the lie of hierarchy means power over and power under, and in many situations it does. There's no question about that. There is a settling that can occur in the herd, if you will, when people understand, okay, I've got this responsibility, you've got that responsibility. In this instance, I'm the leader. In that instance, you're the leader. And we're going to work collaboratively together so that we can actually move the entire enterprise forward.
Yeah, we could probably have another whole conversation about how people who strike out as entrepreneurs then have to learn to be CEOs, which is like the exact opposite mindset. Because as an entrepreneur, you're like, great, I have 7 million ideas and I want these all to happen. And then as a leader, but I love the horse example because I've done a bunch of maybe 4 times I've done equine coaching as the client, and horses also very much respond to authenticity and performativeness. Like I think I've told the doctor this on the podcast before, but the first time I did it, I was very in my head about like needing to show, like I was in a mastermind where I was kind of at the top of the group, quote unquote, in terms of revenue. I was actually closer to the person leading it than everybody else. And so I had a lot of mental drama about like needing this to go a certain way to like show how evolved I was. And the horse was like, fuck you. No interest in any of it. Like, I'm not going to
hear anything of it.
I don't know what's going on. She wasn't even like, fuck you. She was just like, oh, you're here. I don't care. I'm not like interested in you at all.
They disregard untruths.
Yeah. And then I did it a few years later and I was like in a very different headspace and I was able to like get the horse to, standing with my eyes closed, get the horse to run when I wanted it to and stop when I wanted it to. Like it was such a difference. Yeah. And then they're wild. I did a session once also where I was working on relationship stuff and I was like, I'm trying to like embrace more intimacy. And the horse, I have like a hilarious picture of me sitting in a chair and this like 1,000-pound horse is like trying to sit in my lap. It is like on top of me. So anybody who's not done equine coaching, I cannot offer that on the internet, but it is amazing and you should all do it.
My wife has 4 horses and we use them all the time. She uses them all the time in the work. And
I mean, yeah. We're looking to get in a place upstate, and I feel like my poor husband doesn't know what's coming. It's like equine coaching on the. So anyway, we could talk about so many things, but if you were going to kind of distill it, in the opposite of all the complexity we just talked about, if you were going to have one thing you wanted the listeners to take away from this interview about leadership, what would it be?
It's the humanity of it. The more I have worked with clients myself and the more I have done my work, the more human that I have allowed myself to be, the more humane the organizations become. And, I'll say this, the world is hurting really, really badly. We have children killing children because we don't know what to do with these violent impulses, and let's just arm ourselves to the teeth. And there is an opportunity for those of us who hold power to actually do the morally right thing and lean in to being kind. So you don't maximize profit. Who the fuck cares, right? So you don't squeeze out that last drop of oil from the earth. I mean, what is it that we manifested on this earth for, if not to be kind?
And I think to ourselves, right? I think that
yes.
A prescription for every woman listening to this, everybody of any gender, but I think women in particular are socialized to be inhumane to themselves, right? To withhold food, withhold water, don't pee when you have to because you should be working, to beat themselves up and berate themselves. Your humanity towards other people is going to start with your humanity towards yourself, right? You can play act being nice to other people when you're not nice to yourself, but that true compassion, that true connection has to start with yourself, because if you don't have it with yourself, then you don't even know what it is that you're trying to offer to other people.
Amen.
Beautiful.
Well said.
So where can people find your book, find more about you if they want to learn more?
Reboot.io is the website. That's for all things Reboot, the company related. And then there are links to both books. My latest book is Reunion, Leadership and the Longing to Belong, in which I look at the question of what is a leader's responsibility in a world where babies are shooting babies in high school. What is our responsibility? And newsflash, we have a moral responsibility to do something. So both books, you can find links to both books, links to our podcast, the Reboot podcast, all that's on that one website, reboot.io.
And we'll put that in the show notes. So definitely if you are a CEO or a leader, go get the book. But honestly, I think everything we've been talking about relates to how do you lead yourself in your relationships, in your family. We're all leaders in some way, and all these concepts are relevant. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Kara.
If you're loving what you're learning on the podcast, you have got to come check out the Feminist Self-Help Society. It's our newly revamped community and classroom where you get individual help to better apply these concepts to your life, along with a library of next-level, blow-your-mind coaching tools and concepts that I just can't fit in a podcast episode. It's also where you can hang out, get coached, and nerd out about all things thought work and feminist mindset with other podcast listeners just like you and me. It's my favorite place on earth, and it will change your life, I guarantee it. Come join us at www.unfuckyourbrain.com/society. I can't wait to see you there. If you're a therapist and you find yourself getting kind of stuck in certain loops with clients who have been socialized as women around people-pleasing, perfectionism, self-worth, concern about others' perception of them, those kinds of topics, I want to offer you a free tool that will help you. It's called Closing the Brain Gap in Women's Therapy: 3 Ways to Deepen Rapport, Get Better Results, and Blow Your Clients' Minds. It's an absolutely free guide that I wrote because I hear from therapists so often that the socialization lens that I am teaching was not included in their education or their training, and that it is so helpful. And they're trying to apply it based on my podcast or even taking my programs. But I want to create something that was really designed for therapists. So that is what this guide is. It will teach you how to identify that social messaging. It will show you how it's impacting your client's self-esteem, and it will teach you how you can empower your clients more effectively by showing them how socialization may be affecting them. They'll also share some stories from therapists who use these tools about how validating and empowering their clients find it and why it's been such a big boost for their practice. I'm also getting ready to announce in the near future a totally new program that I'm offering just for therapists who want to integrate a feminist lens and the socialization lens specifically into their practice. You will automatically be put on the early bird interest list for that when you download the guide. So if you just go and download the guide, not only do you get all the value in the guide, all of the helpful framing and techniques that I suggest, but you'll also be the first to hear about that program. And if you are not a therapist, but you know a therapist, you're friends with a therapist, you have a family member as a therapist, or you talk about the podcast with your therapist, please share the link with them. Super easy to remember. You just go to feministtherapy.com. Couldn't be easier. feministtherapy.com to download that totally free guide. Or you can text your email to +1 347 997 1784, and the code word is therapy. Either way, please download it, read it, bring it to your sessions, share it with the therapist in your life. We can help so many more women with this work if we spread this knowledge.